Hi YouTube, VidHead85 here, and I am reading an article by Tom Schoenberg, S-C-H-O-E-N, Berg, B-E-R-G, and it's saying Republicans losing election law wars campaigns heat up, or ramps up. So basically, there have been a lot of changes to the voting laws in 2010. And even in the interim for up until the election, Pennsylvania House Majority Leader Mike Turzai said simply, a voter ID law that will allow Mitt Romney to win the election, or to win the state of Pennsylvania. Done. So I'm going to go ahead and get into this, and it starts as such. Republicans are losing most of the court fights with Democrats over whether GOP-backed state voter regulations will illegally suppress turnout among the poor and minorities in the November 6th presidential contest. As the general election begins in earnest today following the conclusion of the Democratic National Convention, legal battles continue in a half-dozen swing states where court challenges await decisions by state and federal judges. Last month, U.S. courts rejected election-related laws passed by Republican-controlled legislatures in Ohio, Florida, and Texas, finding they violated the right to vote. At least 14 cases challenging voter list purges, provisional ballot rules, early voting curbs, or photo identification mandates are pending in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Colorado, Iowa, Florida, and Ohio. Court rulings in those states, which both parties claim they can win in November, could tip the presidential election if the race is as close as it was in 2000 between Al Gore and George W. Bush, said Rick Hansen, a law professor at the University of California, Irvine. If the outcome depends on Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania is extremely close, then these kinds of cases can be determinative. Hansen, the author of The Voting Wars from Florida 2000 to the Next Election Meltdown, said in a telephone interview. Election procedures. Much of the litigation stems from revisions of election procedures Republican lawmakers passed after President Barack Obama's election in 2008. Proponents argue the laws are necessary to prevent fraud and help elections run smoothly. Democrats and voter advocacy groups say the measures used are aimed at disenfranchising likely Democratic voters in a veiled effort to limit turnout for President Obama. We will continue to commit all the resources and energy necessary to protect voters' rights, Bob Bauer, the top lawyer in the Obama campaign, said in an email. This election should be decided by all eligible voters fully participating, and not by an electorate that is cynically limited to satisfy partisan interests. Amanda Hennenberg, a spokeswoman for Republican nominee Mitt Romney's campaign, said, Governor Romney believes that every legal vote should count. Yeah, that's funny. Besides the cases in so-called battleground states, at least 8 more challenges to election law procedures are pending in state and federal courts. Of those in swing states, at least 5 are in Florida and 4 are underway in Ohio. 7 rulings. Last month, in 7 court rulings voiding Republican-sponsored measures, federal judges rejected new limits on early voting in Ohio, turned down a requirement for photographic identification in Texas, and blocked burdensome rules regulating voter registration drives in Florida and Texas. The Texas ruling on registration was put on hold yesterday by a federal appeals court in New Orleans. Huh? Oh, okay, that's probably their district court then, or their closest district court. Additionally, a panel of 3 federal judges ruled electoral districts drawn by Texas Republican-controlled legislature discriminated against minorities in violation of the Voter Rights Act. A judge-approved interim map is set to be used instead. The August rulings were handed down by 7 judges appointed by Democratic President Bill Clinton, 3 nominated by Obama, and 2 chosen by Republican President George W. Bush. A state judge in Des Moines, Iowa, heard arguments yesterday over challenges to Republican-backed rules they are aimed at purging non-citizens from the rolls. Wisconsin appeal. In Wisconsin, Attorney General J.B. Van Hollen, a Republican, is waiting to hear whether the state Supreme Court will consider his appeal to reinstate a photo ID law that was blocked by 2 judges. The Ohio battle over early voting and provisional ballots illustrates what's at stake in the election litigation. No Republican has been elected president without carrying that state's 18 electoral votes. U.S. Vice President Joe Biden, at a campaign in Lordstown on August 31st, said Obama will get a second term if he takes Ohio. A federal judge there, ruling August 31st in a lawsuit brought by the Obama campaign, ordered the restoration of 3 days of early voting that the Republican-controlled legislature cut back. In that case, Obama for America claimed that in the 3 days leading up to the 2008 election, 93,000 Ohio voters cast their ballots. Ohio ballots. 4 days earlier, another judge in Ohio ruled provisional ballots can't be thrown out if they're filled in the wrong precinct because of a poll worker error. In 2008, Ohio rejected 14,355 so-called wrong precinct ballots, according to the judge's decision. Obama won that state by 262,224 votes in 2008. Recent experience proves that our elections are decided all too often by improbably slim margins, not just in local races, but even for the highest national office. U.S. District Judge Algernon L. Marbley said in his August 27th ruling, citing the U.S. Supreme Court's decision in Bush v. Gore. All told, across the U.S., there are at least 8 challenges to state voter identification laws, 6 to state redistricting plans, 4 to early voting restrictions, 4 to voter roll purges, 2 to registration rules, and 2 to ballot disqualification measures. The challenges so far have won favorable rulings in about 10 of the cases. Right or privilege. The courts are making a mistake by saying early voting is a right and not a privilege. Hans Van Spakovsky, a senior legal fellow at the Conservative Heritage Foundation, said in a telephone interview, "Until 10 years ago, there was no early voting. It will be interesting to see what happens once those cases as they get appealed." Republicans scored what might have been their only battleground state victory in the past month when elected Republican Judge Robert Simpson in Pennsylvania upheld a state law requiring photo ID to vote. The decision has been appealed to the state Supreme Court, where arguments before the 3 Democratic and 3 Republican justices are scheduled to begin September 11th. Obama won Pennsylvania by 620,478 votes in the last presidential election, claiming 55 of the total and all of its 20 electoral votes. The ACLU, which sued to block the photo ID law, argued the requirement may end up keeping more people away from the polls than the number that would have constituted Obama's margin of victory. Pennsylvania ID. A state analysis is presented in court showed as much as 9% of Pennsylvania's electorate might be unable to vote in November because of the law. Meanwhile, the U.S. Justice Department is investigating whether the Pennsylvania law violates Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which prohibits states from enacting a voting standard that discriminates against minorities. In a July 23rd letter to the Secretary of State Carol Isheli, the Justice Department asked to review Pennsylvania's voter registration list in addition to the driver's licenses and personal identification card rosters. Matthew Keeler, a spokesman for Isheli, said that he did not respond to a call or email seeking information on the U.S. probe. Mitchell Rivard, a spokesman for the Justice Department, declined to comment. Florida, with 29 electoral votes, combines with Ohio and Pennsylvania to make up almost 25% of the 270 needed to secure the presidency. Florida counties. In Florida, a strict law truncating early voting was rejected for 5 counties subject to supervision under the Voter Rights Act. A 3-judge panel in Washington ruled August 16th that the change could harm the ability of non-white voters to cast their ballots. In 2008, 54% of black voters in Florida voted early, twice the rate of whites, the judges said in their ruling. According to a report paid for by the Democratic National Committee, 1.1 million blacks voted in the state in 2008. Obama won Florida by 236,000 450 votes. The early voting cutbacks were among several changes in election procedures passed by the Republican-controlled Florida legislature last year. Florida is one of 16 jurisdictions with a history of voting rights violations that, under Section 5 of the Voter Rights Act, need to get pre-approval from the Justice Department or a special panel composed of federal district and appeal court judges. The state is still seeking approval of an updated version of its voter plan, which is said in a court ruling filing is needed by the middle of September. And finally, voter registration. In another lawsuit in Florida, U.S. District Judge Robert Hinkle in Tallahassee ruled May 31st that conditions the state imposed on groups signing up voters, such as requirements that the voter drive groups turn over registration materials to the state within 48 hours of completion or face fines of as much as $1,000, are unconstitutional. The League of Women Voters and Rock the Vote sued to overturn the rules, which were permanently blocked on August 31st. These are high stakes, Roger Klebb, president of Center for Equal Opportunity, a self-described conservative think tank that opposes racial preferences, said in a telephone interview. This election is likely going to be close, so there's a greater fear that voter fraud could make a difference. And to be fair, also greater concern that not allowing people who ought to be able to vote an opportunity to vote could make a difference. The Ohio early voting case is Obama for America versus Husted, U.S. District Court in Southern District of Ohio in Columbus. The Florida voter registration case is League of Women Voters versus Browning. That's in U.S. District Court in Northern District of Florida in Tallahassee. The Pennsylvania case is Applewhite versus Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, Supreme Court of Pennsylvania. The Texas redistricting case is Texas versus U.S. District Court, District of Columbia in Washington. So I wanted just to simply share that because of voting is really important this year, and since they know it, they definitely, in those swing states, they definitely want to make sure that folk like me and who are Democrats and are more likely to vote for President Obama do not. So if you haven't registered to vote, get yourself registered. See you later, YouTube.